good seat. Should I just take this one? I'll just sit up here. I want to keep an eye on it.
You're going to do, what's it called, interpretive movement?
Yes. Is this the time for that now? Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for joining us for the second annual Ellen Hughes Lecture on Clinician Wellbeing, which will be presented by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who will introduce formally in a minute. My name is Shelley Adler. I have the great joy of being the director of the UCSF Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. And this lecture is co-hosted by the Osher Center and the Division of General Internal Medicine. I want to take a minute to, first of all, welcome Ellen's family. I'm so delighted that you are all here. And, of course, Ellen's many friends, both those in this room and also the many more who are joining us remotely. I was thinking as I looked around at all the folks that knew and loved Ellen, and all the folks that know and love John, that if we wanted to have a space that would really accommodate everybody, we would have had to rent out AT&T Park. We thought this venue was a little bit more manageable, so I am happy to see you. It's difficult to think of a more appropriate recipient of the Hughes Lecture Award than Dr. Kabat-Zinn, and I had the pleasure of speaking with him and Ellen's family earlier this morning. There was a true and strong connection between the two of you, and that makes your presence here even more special. I am going to go ahead now and ask that my colleague, Dr. Mike Rabo, talk a little bit about the lectureship, and he will be followed by the Chief of Division of General Internal Medicine, Dr. Mitch Feldman. We will then hear our presentation. At the close, at 1 o'clock, there will be a reception that I hope you all stay for. So thank you very much. Thanks, Mike.
Hi, everybody. It's very much my honor just to say a word about the lectureship itself. We started this in 2015 and had our first annual lecture last year, and this is our second annual. We're very, very excited to have Dr. Kabat-Zinn join us. The lectureship was absolutely intended to be an honor to someone who we were all honored to know, Ellen Hughes, someone who cared so deeply about teaching, about learning, about well-being, who modeled a life well lived for all of us. The lectureship is designed to be able to bring nationally recognized and prominent people, as well as people who are a model to us in their practice, focus on clinician well-being. And as I said, a real honor for me to take just a moment to remember the heart of this lectureship, which was Ellen, someone who, as many of you who are here who knew her, brought a light to the world, a light to each of us individually, and brought that to her teaching. I think that all of us who learned from her learned something about how it is to honor our learners in the work that we do. And so, as I say, my honor to introduce you to the lectureship. I would really emphasize my thanks to the selection committee listed in your program. And folks who are interested in becoming part of the selection committee, talk with me afterwards. I also want to thank in particular Cecilia Populus Dave and Chelsea Walker-Mao, who have been really instrumental in making all of this happen, all the moving parts. And lastly, just very briefly, I want to thank all the people who've contributed to the fund that supports this work. So thank you all who have contributed in the past, and I want to alert people to the possibility of contributing to this work moving forward. There's an envelope in your program. There's a site on the DGIM website where you can get more information if you're interested. And most importantly, I really wanted to thank all of you who are here today. I know you came to honor two wonderful people, and you're about to hear from one of them soon enough. To introduce Dr. Kabat-Zinn, let me introduce Mitch Feldman, the chair of DGIM.
We want to get to our main attraction here, so let me just say a few words about Dr. Kabat-Zinn. He's professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where he founded the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society, and its world-renowned mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR clinic. He's the author of 10 books, including the bestsellers Full Catastrophe Living, and Wherever You Go, There You Are, and many other books. With Mark Williams, he's the co-editor of Mindfulness, Diverse Perspectives on Its Meaning, Origins, and Applications. His books are published in over 40 languages. Reminded me that mindfulness, I have a book, there's a chapter in my textbook on behavioral medicine on mindfulness, which they couldn't figure out how to translate into Japanese. So I look forward to talking to you about that. They just called it mindfulness, which I thought was quite curious since we thought that concept came from the East. But his work has contributed to a growing movement of mindfulness. It's not really growing anymore. It's become a movement, I think, into mainstream institutions such as medicine, higher education, criminal justice, and professional sports. Hospitals and medical centers around the world offer clinical programs based on MBSR. And John lectures and leads mindfulness workshops and retreats around the world. And we're honored to have John Kabat-Zinn with us today. I can't think of anyone more appropriate, as Shelley mentioned, to help us honor Ellen's legacy. And I did take this opportunity to reread a few of the books. I have them here. They're beautifully written, compelling, as compelling today as when they were first published. And I want to just read one little piece here, and then I'll have you come up. So this is from the introduction of Wherever You Go, There You Are. And he wrote, guess what? When it comes right down to it, wherever you go, there you are. Whatever you wind up doing, that's what you've wound up doing. Whatever you're thinking right now, that's what's on your mind. Whatever has happened to you, it has already happened. The important question is, how are you going to handle it? In other words, now what? So our now what is to welcome Dr. Kabat-Zinn up on the stage.
So it's a delight for me to be here, and I want to thank the organizers at the Osher Center for making this possible and for having this lectureship in memory of Ellen. You know, when I first got the invitation to give the Ellen Hughes Memorial Lecture, I was shocked because I didn't know that Ellen had died. So, and we did not know each other very well, but we had a very profound connection. And then her sister Nancy, who's here in the front row, reminded me that Ellen and Nancy were at a 7-day professional training mindfulness retreat that I led down the coast a little bit at Mount Madonna. And so we've actually practiced together. And Ellen's family is here, Nancy's children. Amy and Peter, and Peter's wife, Beth. And I can't tell you what it means to me to have you sitting in the front row, because as soon as I learned that there was a memorial lecture and I was being invited to give it, it's like, well, of course I'm going to do it. I mean, there was no question about it. And the reason was not because I'm looking for one more occasion to hold a microphone in front of an audience, but because she was such an extraordinary human being. And what I'm hoping to do today is give you a sense of what she loved that is related to the subject of mindfulness. And mindfulness is a very big word. It has a lot of different meanings, and it's true that it is exploding now in the world. And I think that is a very good thing, in spite of all of the related hype and commodification and stuff that inevitably accompanies any kind of phenomenon that becomes successful. Then everybody wants to hitch their wagon to it. They don't even know what the it is. You can't even spell mindfulness in some times, but they want it. Okay? But Ellen knew it from the inside. She was a deep, deep meditative practitioner. She had been to Tibet. She had sat many, many meditation retreats. And so the subject here is about mindfulness and clinician well-being. Okay? And it's clinician well-being. It's not just physician well-being, as I understand it. And this is a very important distinction, because when we become more aware, which is to a first approximation what mindfulness is all about, it's, if you're wondering about what it is, just think of it as awareness. And if you're wondering what awareness is, welcome to the club, because nobody knows, even the greatest neuroscientists. And I see one of them sitting right there, Helen Wang, enormously. UCSF is enormously lucky to have you here, and I just have infinite regard for you. But even the greatest neuroscientists, when it comes to awareness or sentience, it's like, not there yet, okay? Maybe ever. I mean, there's a kind of complexity to us humans that is awe-inspiring, and that we forget about it. So let me just give you a little example, and I'll try to link all these different threads together, and then we'll have some Q&A, I'm hoping, at the end, so that we can really dialogue around some of these issues. But don't forget that it's about well-being, okay? And it's also about wakefulness, and it's also about being human. And Ellen didn't teach this, she lived it. And because she lived it, she embodied it. And because she embodied it, people could feel it. So it wasn't one more catechism or philosophy or meditation instruction set that she was imposing on you and saying, of course, if you do this, you'll be a better person, you'll be a better clinician, you'll have less stress or whatever. It's like, no, there's a different kind of learning, a different kind of transmission. True education is drawing out from the other what's already inside. But it's not merely cognitive, and this is one of our big problems, is that we're so in our heads so much of the time. And then if you're in a university, just multiply that by a factor of like 1 million. And then if you're in a medical school, multiply that by a factor of 1 million, okay? So it's just we don't get educated around other aspects of our own human intelligences. One of which is this thing that's in plain sight but isn't a thing, but a property of our being, which is called awareness. And we don't know how it arises. But think for a moment, right inside your little old head, under the vault of your beautiful cranium, whether you have hair or not, is the most elaborate organization of matter in the known by us universe. Okay? At last count, it was something north of 86 billion neurons. There are an equal number of glial cells, and frankly, no one has the slightest idea what they're doing in there. So they just call them housekeepers, sort of like already we're developing more privileged and less privileged cell groups, It's like, he says they're just housekeepers. They're like, cleaning up. They keep the neurons happy. I'm guessing that that's not the way it works, when all is said and done. But that brings up another element of this that was extremely important to Ellen, and that is that well-being really has to include societal well-being. It has to include, in some sense, the body politic, because we can't be whole in a society that doesn't value wholeness. We can't be well in a sick society. And it's not just whether the water is contaminated or whether the air is polluted or whether the food is contaminated, but there are other levels of contamination that we are seeing big time on every conceivable news media outlet you can see. And that's a certain kind of diet. And it's a certain kind of atmosphere that we're breathing in and breathing out, and it has its effects whether you know it or not, whether you feel it or not. And so this is a big issue. It's not just like clinician well-being in an environment that is like, toxic. And that toxicity we cannot blame on, I wish we could, but we can't just blame it on a particular few individuals or a particular kind of whoever's occupying the White House at the moment. There's something much deeper going on that actually originated before this country's founding. I mean, just a few little things called genocide and 400 years of enslavement of other human beings. And then developing legal structures, which is it's the legal equivalent or the body politic equivalent of metabolic homeostatic regulation, so that we decide who is valuable, who gets benefits, who does not get benefits, so how society should work, and that's totally accepted often by the dominant privileged people. And then the laws, like, it's life and death for anybody who's not seen or not met. So if we're talking about well-being, you can't isolate clinician well-being without looking at the whole and the nested levels of whole. So to come back to your cranium and what's underneath, 86 billion neurons, and each with just enormous arborization of dendrites. And so in terms of connectivity, in terms of synapses, there are hundreds of trillions of synaptic connections in your brain. And it used to be thought that, when you grow up, that was it, it was all set. But it turns out that the brain is much cleverer than that, and it is the organ of experience that's stop me if I'm saying anything that's really grossly off base here. I'm taking poetic license in a certain way. But it is the organ of experience which in many ways is continually restructuring itself on the basis of that experience. And if that experience is driven by trauma, for instance, including societal trauma, economic trauma, over time, that has very deleterious effects on brain structure. Okay? And the same for virtually everything else, that, the brain is listening to how we're thinking, behaving, emoting, and it is reshaping itself. And if you say, train as an athlete, brain responds to that in many, many different ways. And if you never do anything with your body, the brain knows that too. And the same for what you eat, and the same for how much sleep you get, and the same for, affection and love, and how much a sense of deep connection there is between people, which is something that was like absolutely critical, axiomatic for Ellen. And that love is, sort of not something we talk about, it's something that we feel on a multitude of levels. And so, if we're talking about well-being, a good place to start is where you have the most degrees of freedom. That's not Donald Trump. Okay? That's you. Okay? Because you have the same 24 hours that everybody else gets. And within that 24 hours, you have, to a first approximation, an infinite number of moments that you have a huge degrees of freedom about how you're going to actually live in those moments. And if you choose to actually befriend that capacity that we always ignore and don't pay any attention to, called awareness, then you're already at home. And how do you feel when you're really, 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 really at home? You feel well, right? So, what if you were at home everywhere? What if you were at home when you were in the hospital? What if you were at home when you were rounding? What if you were at home when you were in meetings, boring meetings with people you don't want to actually hear what they have to say? What if you actually could, this was not some kind of principle you impose on yourself or some kind of catechism or belief system, but what if it was a way of being that you could actually cultivate in the same way as you could cultivate exercise? In the same way as that would, like when you walk into a patient's room, for instance, how present are you? How much do you have, like what's on your phone in mind? Or who was the last person you saw? Or who the next person, or how stressed you are, or whatever it is. There's an infinite number of ways in which you can not be completely here for the person, but think you are. Make a distinction between thinking and awarenessing, embodied awareness. And you know who is a really, really fantastic detector of that lack of presence on your part? You know who. Everybody else. Yeah. The patient, your spouse, your children, they have fantastic, sort of detectors for how out to lunch you are. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so this is a muscle you can exercise. It's not a philosophy. You can actually practice seeing how much you are not present or are. And that is then related to medicine in a lot of different ways. For instance, just the word practice. Practice is as a medical term, my practice. I have a practice. I have an oncology practice. I have a cardiology practice. We use that same term in the meditative world. Practice is not a rehearsal for a performance. Practice is remembering that it's possible to be awake. That's all. And then the consequence of remembering is you're already awake. So you don't have to do anything. This is beginning to sound very Taoist, like non-doing. But it's actually totally true. And in 1979, when I started the stress reduction clinic, and it was like the birth of MBSR, part of it was like an experiment to see whether meditation is something that regular Americans would engage in. There was always the kind of like Beat Generation and the kind of lunatic fringe and the Buddhists who are out there in temples or monasteries and romantically, doing all these things that they weren't doing, but we thought that was like fantastic. For the most part. Only 3%, or maybe less, of all monastics in the Buddhist tradition have a meditation practice, formal meditation practice. They're doing other things. It's not that they're bad, but it's like our romantic ideas about it all may not be so accurate. But Ellen knew this stuff from the inside. She went and she practiced in those temples. She got what the 3% was doing, or the 1%. And that's actually entered into mainstream American culture now, and also Buddhist culture in ways that even the Buddhists in Asia, like looking at Americans and looking at Europeans and looking at South Americans and so forth, and saying, we got things to learn from them. Why? Because the non-cultural, non-ideological, non-religious elements, they evolve. It's not like, and the Dalai Lama says this all the time. I mean, if Buddhism was all about the past, it would be like a museum. It would be of no use. But what Buddhism discovered, and many other cultures discovered, is a kind of universal attributes or characteristics of humanity that can actually be tapped, that can be developed, that can be rooted, that can be elaborated for your own benefit in the present moment. And they all come down to mindfulness, which the Buddha himself called the direct path to liberation. When all is said and done. It's like, how willing are you to drop into now? Drop into your body. Be with things as they are without getting so caught up in the head or in your phone that you're not really present. And as we said, the patients know that, your children know that. You know, we're sometimes the last person to know it, but if we exercise the muscle, actually cultivate it. And then you don't go around claiming, now I'm mindful. Because whoever it is that's claiming to be mindful isn't mindful. Because then it's more just like self-promotion, right? And underscore self. And the interesting thing about this is if you start to actually deconstruct who you think you are, it's like an endless regress of mirrors, okay? It's like, are you your name? Are you your age? Are you your gender identification? Are you your ideas and opinions? Are you... And you start to really look into it, and you say, no, not that. Maybe some element of experience, but that's not me. And you just, then who are you? And that's a really profound meditation. That's probably the most profound meditation of all, is to just ask yourself, who am I, or what am I? And then listen. And if your opinionated thinking mind can attenuate a little bit, or get out of the way, or you learn how to drop underneath it, it's like maybe you don't know. And maybe that's where things start to get interesting. Okay? Because can you be the knowing of not knowing? That might be like at the very verge of kind of experiment, of discovery. Every good or great scientist is absolutely essential to be comfortable with the domain of not knowing. And knowing or feeling, because often you can't express it in thinking, but feeling where the potential, as they say, tractable edges are, where we can go from the not knowing to create some kind of lens or experiment to elucidate one more thing that might come into the domain of known. But we know far less than we don't know. And so if we could learn how to actually be in not knowing, but appreciate the beauty of what's unfolding, as well as the challenges facing, of disease, old age, sickness, death, the inevitability of all of that, then in some sense, life lights up. And we have like an infinite number of opportunities to actually embody, through our presence and through our practice in the way that I'm meaning it, the beauty of who you are and everything you know on a cognitive level. So that, like, if you're a physician, you bring all that to the bedside. But you don't leave your true self, if you will, at the door because you're busy. Or you just need to get to the diagnosis and miss the patient in the process. Or you're treating the patient as a diagnosis. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, because people who came to this talk already know all of this stuff. It's the people who are not coming to the talk that really should be in the room and talk, right? I mean, it's always that way. But if we gave a talk on mindfulness 35 years ago, or 50 years ago, no one would have come. And now, as was said, it is exploding. If you chart the number of papers in the scientific literature with a fairly rigorous screen for what you'll accept as a paper, that has the word mindfulness in the title, it starts, virtually like background zero, one or two papers in the early 80s, and now it's going straight up. And in 2016, it was like 700 papers. And I just got the data for 2017, they're preliminary, and for the first time, it's still 700 papers. It's not like 900 papers. So nothing on this planet can continually go exponential. There has to be a maturation of the unfolding at a certain point, so that it's like more is not better. It's like deeper, more rigorous, more, insightful. So anyway, it may be peaking, but that's 700 papers on basically something that comes out of Buddhist meditation practice that is in mainstream science and being funded at very respectable levels by the NIH and other funding agencies, both private and public. When I started MBSR in 1979, the idea that the NIH would be funding mindfulness meditation research at the level that it's doing now is more improbable. It would have been more improbable than that the Big Bang that gave rise to this universe that we're in, because it turns out there are multi-universes and multiple levels of universes, so we can't just talk about even our universe anymore. It's really humiliating. But that the NIH would fund mindfulness research, more improbable than that the Big Bang would have all of a sudden stopped the universe expanding. The universe would have stopped expanding at an exponential rate driven by dark energy and begun to collapse back on itself. And yet it's happened. It's happened. So there are these currents that are happening on the planet that are when it comes to well-being, when it comes to health, when it comes to our biological understanding of health and well-being, that are really phenomenal. And we need to keep them in mind because that will help us to navigate both our own interior life's course and how we act and behave in the world individually and societally, and what our values are and how they are manifest. How they are manifest. So that's what the meditation practice is all about. It's about embodying wakefulness in the only moment any of us ever get. When we would invite people into the MBSR clinic, and these are people with every conceivable medical diagnosis on an outpatient basis that you can imagine, sometimes on inpatient, we'll take them straight from they'll come in their hospital beds. What we would say to them, because we never tried to sell MBSR to them, it's hard. It's like you take the stress reduction program, it's the most stressful thing you're going to do in your life, you know. It's not going to just eliminate your stress. It's going to put it all in your face in a certain way. Remember, it's about awareness. And we say this to them. Look, from our point of view, you know, and some people like have multiple diagnoses, really horrible stuff going on. From our point of view, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And what we're going to do during these 8 weeks, because it's a clinic in the form of a course, is pour energy in the form of attention and awareness into what's right with you. Let the rest of UCSF or the medical center take care of what's wrong, and just see what happens in 8 weeks. A little experiment. And what happens in most cases is that people actually wake up to something about themselves, and they want to participate in their own trajectory towards greater health and well-being. So this is where you take care of yourself and you somehow rotate orthogonally in consciousness and drop in. You're the first beneficiary, but your patients benefit equally. Why? Because they know as soon as you're not present. They know. When you're stressed, they're stressed. And they don't want to make you more stressed. They won't even ask the most important questions that they have, because they can tell that you don't want to hear it. That's iatrogenic. That's causing some kind of harm. And you'll be the last one to know it. Why? Because you don't know what you don't know. But you could actually, and you never know what you can know. So I'm not idealizing mindfulness as now you'll know everything you're supposed to, but don't. But more that you might be a little bit more modest in what you claim to know. And maybe listen slightly differently or attend. After all, aren't physicians who round in the hospital called attendings? Again, nobody in this room should take offense at that, but it would be a good idea to really exercise the muscle of attending. You do that by paying attention. And the operational working definition of mindfulness is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, which means you don't bring all your ideas and opinions, likes and dislikes to the table as if they're the truth, but you know that they're there because they're a plague, and we all have it, but you uncouple from them enough so that for that moment you have maybe certain kind of open-hearted spaciousness, equanimity, availability. When patients enter the hospital, aren't they given now, I guess everything's electronic medical records, right? And, which is causing infinite stress among the physicians. Horrible. I mean, people are quitting the profession because of the electronic medical record. I know people who, my doctor quit us. I'm taking this very personally. So an encounter form is filled out, charges are made to your health insurance, but I wonder how many times there's been an encounter. A lot of the time there's money exchanged, encounter form, but no encounter. Because what we most yearn is to be met, to be seen, to be heard. And when you are that for the other, it brings it out in the other. Because we're not separate, isolated monads. We are socially and neurologically interconnected in ways that hundreds more years of research will still not completely unpack. But we resonate with each other in multiplicity of levels. And when because all of you, sooner or later, you're going to be a patient. And how are you going to want to be met? Are you going to want to be met? Are you going to want to be seen? And will you know it when you're not? Yes, you will. That's one of the most fundamental human antennas, is to know when you're being disregarded. And it's a form of violence. When you're aware of it, then you see, oh, it's not just the other people who are violent. I too can be violent. The greatest person on the planet, I can be violent. Isn't that true? I mean, there's a wonderful poem. I should talk a little. I want to leave time for questions. You're getting the drift that this is about practice. It's about cultivating wakefulness. And the way you do it is by living your life as if it really mattered. But sometimes it's helpful to actually do it, making some time to just practice, okay? Now, no one's got any time for this. But how many of you sleep every night? Anybody, or at least attempt to sleep every night? Okay, so listen. Meditate in bed when you wake up in the morning. Okay? Meditate in bed. If you're really, really brave, or what I'm saying really, really resonates with you, wake up 10 minutes earlier. Wake up 10 minutes earlier so that you don't go, oh my God, I'm late already. But you got these 10 infinite number of minutes, and just lie there and see if you can feel your feet. Feel your hands, the sensory domain of the hands. Feel the entirety of your body from head to toe. Feel your breath moving in and out of the body. And finish the job of waking up. Then because it's the awareness of the sensations in your hands and feet, the awareness of the sensations of the breath moving, that awareness is inhabitable and it's portable. You can take it out of bed. You can brush your teeth with awareness. I'm famous for saying, when you're in the shower, check and see if you're in the shower. You may not be in the shower. Or if it's on Monday morning, you may have your whole first Monday morning meeting in the shower with you, and you're in an argument with somebody already in the meeting. And it's in the shower, and you're all by yourself. But you're missing the shower. And if you start to pay attention, if you start to cultivate mindfulness, how many of you have a regular mindfulness practice? Because I'm probably talking to the choir. Okay. The first thing, I'm sure you'll agree, the first thing you start to notice when you start to pay attention this way is how out to lunch you are, how mindless you are. And so it's really important not to take it personally. So if you hear nothing else from this about well-being, whether it's yours or your patient's, here's this. Don't take personally things that aren't personal. That's like your take-home message for the day. Now, how are you going to know? Well, it's not through thinking, but if you start to pay attention, you'll have multiple ways of knowing. You'll have the whole sensory field, all of your senses, and there are far more than 5 of them. There's throughout proprioception and interoception being two extremely important ones that hopefully are making it into the textbooks nowadays. Okay, so I want to just say a few things about how, and Ellen knew this so profoundly, and she embodied it. So it was like, when you see somebody like Ellen, you realize that she's operating on a lot of different levels simultaneously. One of them is selfless, okay? That's why, in some sense, she was like the embodiment of what the Buddhists would call a bodhisattva. It was like her love was beyond her. It wasn't about more for me. It was about passion for. And don't forget, the words medicine, meditation, they sound a lot alike. They're rooted at the etymological hip in the sort of deep Indo-European root. So this is a practice. You have to practice. You don't have to do it sitting. Just the real meditation practice is every moment. How many of you have had surgery? Do you want your surgeon to be in the present moment when she's cutting into you? Yes, you do. She may not be cutting into you. It may be the intern that's cutting into you, a resident. But whatever it is, you want, we want everybody to pay attention when it comes to us. Why? Because we're like the most important person on the planet. So we have a universe where everybody is the center of the universe, which is just fine, except that we're not aware that everybody else is the center of the universe too. So we don't want to share that. It's just like, I'm numero uno. So Emily, I'll share 2 poems with you that point in this direction, but it's really about the meditation practice, and I can't go into it any more deeply except to say that if you make life your meditation practice as an experiment, just for, say, try it for the next 6 or 8 years and on a regular, intensive basis, and see what happens. I mean, your children will be your teachers. Your parents will be your teachers if you have parents. Your spouse or partner, who's not your teacher? Your patients will be your teachers. So the first poem is by Emily Dickinson. It's kind of a love poem. I'm going to do this quickly because I want to leave time for questions. So this is like unrequited love or disaster love, and she had that in spades. So, and for Emily Dickinson, you have to listen very, very, very carefully, because no one ever wrote like this. Me from myself to banish had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be except by abdication, me of me. Can you feel that? So how many times a day do we do that? How many times a day do we go off with some me and we forget the 99% of me that doesn't get nurtured? When you nurture the other dimension of it, you've got Aristotle's eudaimonia, happiness, well-being, wisdom, all rolled up into one, right here in that moment. Notice there was an impulsive, maybe if you were listening, ordinarily in English I would say right there in that moment. But there is no there. It's always here, because it's always now. And when this stops being a philosophy or a good idea, but becomes how you be in relationship, that's what mindfulness is. In relationship to life unfolding in the only moment we ever get, now. And then instead of abdicating and instead of disintegrating into different cells for different moments and showing different sides of yourself to other people, you are the same. And you're in touch with the knowing and the not knowing. In fact, you are the knowing and the not knowing more than you're anything else. Play with that. I throw it out in a sort of provocative. Ellen lived this. She would have her own way of saying it because no 2 people ever talk about this the same way. That's the beauty of it. It's like flowers. No two flowers are the same. Last poem. Derek Walcott, who won the Nobel Prize from the Afro-Caribbean culture, St. Lucia in the Caribbean, short poem called Love After Love. And think about the first poem, about separating from oneself, about not seeing who one truly is because too busy. Even in the shower, too busy. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. And each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to yourself. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. So the sitting doesn't mean necessarily sitting down. It means dropping in, dropping in, dropping in. And you can drop in over and over and over because the mind is going to do the exact opposite. It's going to drop out. You put people in an fMRI scan and tell them to do nothing in the midline region, the sort of default mode network, so-called, just goes insane. And what's it perseverating over? What's it doing in there? Some people call it mind wandering. And, but where's the mind wandering? Well, the future. Any of you ever worry about, what's to come? Check out how much of the time you spend in the future, since you're not there yet. The past. Any of you ever worry or, perseverate about what happened and why it would have been better the other way or whatever? That's over. So this mind wandering is all about me. It's a subjective, it's the story of me. Starring me. What could be more interesting than that? That's going on in the scanner. Every time you put somebody in the scanner, say, don't bother to do anything, just a rest period. Whoopee! And the default mode network goes insane. You train people in MBSR for 8 weeks. That doesn't go away, but it does attenuate, and it uncouples from something else, a more lateral network that involves the insula and other structures, and that is more like no narrative, no story. It's like this breath, this moment, this water on my body in the shower. I know it's Monday and I got to get to work, but there's an awareness that's timeless. The present moment is, in fact, timeless. So then you're actually driving neuroplasticity in different, if you keep that up, if you keep exercising the muscle, you can actually make use of the default mode network. It's not bad, it's gotten us this far, but it's really helpful if you have other networks that you're recruiting to kind of navigate the ups and downs of an incredibly stressful, confusing, challenging life. And then if you throw in evidence from, Helen could give this talk far better than I about what's going on, what the promise and also the pitfalls and the challenges are, so that we don't oversimplify or overstate or exaggerate the findings, but in neuroplasticity and how the brain does respond in terms of compassion, in terms of loving kindness, in terms of all sorts of ways that you can exercise this muscle intentionally by paying attention. But also epigenetics, it turns out your genes have ears. They are listening to you dropping into being. And they can upregulate and downregulate by the hundreds, if not the thousands. And some of those genes have to do with inflammation, inflammatory processes, proto-oncogenic processes. So, we're beginning to understand in ways that 20 years ago we had no idea that the body was that fluid, that the biology was, in fact, that dynamic, that there's never been more evidence than there is today. And also, if you throw in the telomere story and other avenues of that have to do with cell health and longevity, there's never been a better time to actually practice non-doing. The evidence is plenty there. And then when you're not doing, exercise. And when you're not exercising, eat right. And when you're not eating right, be kind. What's the big deal? You know, it's like doesn't even take any time. As long as you're awake. If you're not awake, well, then that has its own consequences, okay? But let's not make it into a dualism, because all of us are, zoning along on autopilot a great deal of the time. But if we're talking about clinician well-being, if we're talking about the hospital well-being, if we're talking about the UCSF well-being, if we're talking about community well-being, if we're talking social justice and economic well-being, we need to hold the whole of it. And the beauty of being human is we're capable of it. And when all is said and done, that will be in part the theme of part of my talk tomorrow. It's love that does all the holding. And everything I've said is, in some sense, meant to be a provocative, radical invitation to love the actuality of things as they are, and to know that dimension of your humanity that's capable of it, intimately. Intimacy with your own awareness. So I want to thank you for your attention. Of course, you've probably gotten the idea. I could talk like this for another 3 or 4 hours, because it's so alive and it's so easily missed and so also easily trivialized. But I would like to leave some time for dialogue. So if you have a question, or if anything was unclear, or you just want to bring something up, Jane.
What's the difference that makes it? Okay. What's the amount of time, the difference that makes a difference, and for people who are kind of time urgent, and in terms of benefits, and how many people? What's the percentage of people that have taken MBSR that are still meditating a year later? Great questions. So no one knows what how long. So, and, I know a lot of people who are really interested in that and trying to do it, but all the studies that I've seen suggest that you can cut it down more and more and more and still have benefit. But the problem is, how do you do the cutting? In other words, the teaching, the embodied elements of this are absolutely essential. Then, 1 moment could be enough, life-changing even. But it has to be 1 moment of authentic presence. And that's not so easy to come by. So the practice really, that's why I keep saying, the practice is living life as if it really mattered in the only moment any of us ever have. If you're here for this moment, you've already changed the future. Because your willingness to be present in this moment of now makes the next moment of now different. If you want the future to be different, it's the only way I know to actually live into it in that way. And the other question was, remind me? How many people are still meditating? A year later. Well, I did a study back in the 80s that said that it depends on how you define still meditating after a year. But if it includes moment-to-moment awareness, awareness of breath as you're going through activities of daily living and so forth, it was 95% of all the people that we've seen. On the other hand, if you have more stringent criteria for formal practice and how many people do that, it goes down, but it's still significant. And we see people all the time, since we're moving into our 40th year. And we still see people, if they were young enough, who are, come back and say, I was in your class in 1979, There are not that many of those. And they say, and I'm still practicing. And could I have another tape? I say, tapes are long gone, So again, this is a sociological shift that's happening, so that and so that meditation, medicine, they are moving the bell curve of society in a way that's beginning to beginning to take root and understand that there is if we cultivate this participatory element to medicine, then that's really cheap, because then you get us all to do our own work on ourselves instead of trying to fix everything with an automechanics model of medicine, even if it's a, sort of genetic, precise automechanics model. And I'm not knocking, sort of genetic medicine, but you still need to get the human being engaged in it. So.
I want to invite folks to stay because we are going to have a reception now, but I do want to close this portion of the event, and thank you so much.
Are you sure there aren't one or two more questions?
I'm sure there. No, it looks like no questions. I want to make sure that people. I want to make sure that people who want to be able to.
Please don't. Wait a second. If anybody wants to leave, you can leave.
That's what I want to say.
That would be fine, but I don't want to sort of walk out after having said questions. Yeah, and you should feel free to walk out the door. It's time to go. If I could go, I'd go myself.
So I have a question about guided versus non-guided meditation. So I read your book, Mindfulness for Beginners, as an audiobook. And I've never gotten past listening to it was about a 30-minute guided meditation. And that's about how far I've got. I've listened to that like 250 times. And I have difficulties, just doing meditation by myself. But I feel better after doing that. Is that... It's
okay, but I suggest you break your CD player.
Okay.
And just do it yourself. As an experiment, try alternating. If you're doing it every day, try alternating days and just be there with the boredom. Be there with the uncomfortableness of it. Be there with the, what am I supposed to be doing now? I like this so much better when he's guiding it. And ask yourself whether your awareness of your discomfort isn't that as much mindfulness as anything else. So maybe you're trying to get a certain kind of effect from your meditation practice as opposed to just being at home with whatever is arising. So that would be something I would suggest to play with. And yeah, this will be the last question, but yeah. Can you send it out from there?
Yeah, I can. My name's Carter. I'm a surgeon here at UCSF, so I enjoyed your comments about surgeons and interns making the incision. I've been studying MBSR in our interns as a randomized control. And recently...
I'm sorry, say that again so I understand exactly what you're studying.
I've been studying your 8-week MBSR course through an instructor you trained
Oh, okay.
on our incoming surgical interns.
Fantastic.
For 2 years now. And it's been fascinating what they get out of it, what we see.
You're seeing something interesting coming out of it?
We really are. But what I wanted to
That's
say,
huge to hear. I mean, it's like,
what I wanted to say was I'm eternally grateful to you for what you have created. And as part of the thanks, I want to tell you that we recently began doing a similar study in faculty surgeons. And the other night, one came to class and said, I've been up all night transplanting kidneys, and I have 3 more waiting all day tomorrow. So over 48 hours, he would have slept maybe 3.
right.
And we said to him, why are you not on the floor in your office drooling? Why are you in class? And he said, because I realized he's in week 4. This rejuvenates me more than sleep ever could.
Well, you've just made not my day, but my universe, I mean, you know how long I've waited to hear that from the Department of Surgery?
What I'd like to ask you is, just your comment right there about surgery, I think you said the hill I have to climb. And I know in the 70s and 80s, surely you must have climbed an equally steep hill.
Yeah.
So how do you keep the longevity and keep your...
Yeah. Well, one way would be any way you can. Trust yourself. Okay, so it's like you can't be anybody else, but you can be 100% you. And your whole life and all of your training and everything that you succeeded in up to this point, that brought you to this point, that's all culminating in this moment. And there's a lot of trustworthiness in that and in what really is begging for some kind of emergence, even if you can't fully articulate it or argue why the curriculum should have time for that kind of thing. But if you know it and you care that much, that's how things change. That's how institutions change. That's how minds change. But you do have to be in it for the long haul. On September 11th, I was actually teaching with my wife out on Whidbey Island in the Puget Sound on September 11th, 2001. Okay, so couldn't get home. No planes flying, and there were gigantic warships all over the place, because it's Puget Sound. And we went to visit a Japanese Zen master who has a place on the island, a zendo on the island. And at the end of us being there for the day, because I just didn't want to watch the towers come down one more time, we went to visit him, sat with him that day. He gave me an enzo, a Japanese calligraphy of a swirling one stroke circle, and underneath it said, "Never forget the 1,000-year view." And I have a 1,000-year view. You think that, the idea of bringing Buddhist meditative practice without the Buddhism, but without losing the essence into the mainstream of Western civilization, never mind medicine, that's it's absurd. And yet, if that's what you love, and if that's what you see your potential contribution to be, then you do it, but not for your ego or for, your own self-aggrandizement, but out of love. You've gotten this far. I mean, it's totally amazing. I think that the world is literally starving and dying, including surgery and the culture of surgery and the culture of medicine, dying for this. And although there's all sorts of beauty also unfolding within it. I mean, it's both. It's not either or. That's why it needs a dualistic wisdom approach. And that's something where, you see, no one can tell you how to do that except your love. And if you trust that and your practice, nothing, it will emerge in some form or other because you care. That's the way I see it. And I don't see it that way just because I happen to, quote unquote, succeed in what I wanted to do. That was the principle from the very beginning. I mean, and that's what I think all of us need to be doing. Because sooner or later, we'll all be dead. No kidding. I don't think there'll be any exceptions. And the question is, between now and then, how do you want to live? How do you want to live, not die? And that includes, how do you want to work? My friend Ron Epstein, just to mention it, because I've played on the word attending, he wrote a book called Attending, all about mindfulness in medicine. It's really good. It's really worth reading if you're a physician, especially. Because a lot of the time we get straitjacketed into forms that we're dying in medicine, and sometimes even our patients or the institution of medicine is dying for. And I think the time has come for medicine to, in some sense, reclaim itself and surgery, and not have it be a commodified thing that business people decide how this is all going to unfold. Its roots are in the Hippocratic Oath, and that is, one, first do no harm, and how could you even know if you're doing no harm unless you are aware? And the other, and really aware, and the other thing is that you're basically putting the other's needs before your own. The patient's needs come first. And that's selflessness. When you're enacting selflessness, you're embodying that Hippocratic ideal, but it's not an ideal when you are willing to stay real. Now, how you do that without enormous, enduring, permanent cost to yourself, that's the art form of the practice. And it does include sometimes saying, I'm off. No, I can't. Because you have to take care of the instrument or the work won't get done. But I would say that, we could talk forever about that one. So it was the last question, and it's winding up. I'm sorry. But I'm so glad you got to ask it, because deep bow to you for what you're doing. Music to my ears. Well, we're all in it together. That's the beauty of it. It's there's no central node here. When we all take responsibility for this, and this is how the country is going to change, by the way, and this is how social justice is going to emerge. And it's like it's not like, oh, let's let a few big shots, whether they're white men or black women or trans people, let's let a few big shots take care of it. Bad idea. Let's have it be emergent, and we're all taking responsibility for it as cells of the one-body politic, as citizens, as people who care about medicine. At one point, do you care enough about medicine to start taking responsibility for the way it is offered? And Ellen was like, I use this term with her family, she was a true bodhisattva. She really embodied it. And that's what I've been talking about all hour, is not talk about meditation, embody wakefulness. Embody wakefulness and heartfulness, because the words mind and the words heart in all Asian languages are the same word. If you don't understand mindfulness or hear mindfulness as heartfulness, you're not understanding it. And sometimes we just talk about mindfulness. It's just bullshit. Talk about compassion. Equal bullshit. How about we live it and let others do the talking? So thank you very much, and just such an honor to be able to give this talk.
Thank you, everyone. I hope at least some of you can stay now. Thanks. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Boy, you hit everything. Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for stopping. No,